Hi, today we are talking about vintage guitars and we are here at Heirlooms Music in Singapore, and we've got Andre here who knows a lot about vintage guitars, and he's going to be sharing a little bit about why vintage guitars might be just for you. Alright, so to get us started, Andre, very simple question, what is a vintage guitar?
Okay, so vintage guitars are typically defined by a lot of people as guitars that are over 30 years old, but the general consensus is any guitar that's built before the 80s is vintage.
Okay. So if it's a 100-year-old guitar, can you call it an antique guitar?
Yeah, so those are also considered, and also people do believe that guitars that are about 100 years old are antiques as well.
Okay.
But there's sort of a grey area between vintage and antique, because if you look at a guitar from 1920s right now, that's still considered vintage.
So just because a guitar is old doesn't mean that it's going to sound great, doesn't mean that it's going to be valuable. But I see here, I'm holding, this is like a holy grail guitar, and you've got so many beautiful vintage guitars here at Heirlooms Music. What makes an old guitar worthy of being considered a vintage guitar that's really valuable and sounds great?
Okay, so we'll start with, since you're holding a Martin, we'll start with Martins. So Martin guitars built in the golden era, which is about 1920s to 1940s.
Right.
The way they're constructed is very different in the original Martin factory. The glue they use, the construction methods they use, very different. And that's part of the reason why they sound good and age well. Some guitars don't age well. Martin guitars age very well because of the methods and processes they used back in the day and the way they constructed the guitar. So that's why they hold value, because number one, great construction methods, good materials used, and also they have a very systematic track keeping record of the guitars. And they don't have a vast vast number of models. They actually have a few models only, so it's actually easy to keep up with the models. And because of their record keeping system, which is so well kept, that you're able to track the guitars very well. For example, if you bought a Martin guitar that was made in 1940s, and maybe some repair work was done to it by Martin, all you have to do is look up the serial number, and you'll see when it was made, when it was bought, and what work was done to it as well.
Okay.
So it's very detailed.
It sounds as though they knew that their instruments would become valuable vintage instruments right from the beginning, when they were new guitars in the 1940s.
I guess you could say that. And part of the reason why they're also very valuable is because it's been a family-owned business until now.
Right.
So there's heritage.
So it's still owned by the Martin family.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so there's a consistency in all the guitars and the methods used and the construction. They keep consistency in the brand in general, because it's still family-owned.
Okay.
Whereas brands like Gibson, yes, they also have a track keeping method. However, I would say it's not as detailed as Martin, and also because they've got a huge number of models, it's a bit more tricky to keep track of them. So the Gibson vintages do have value, but I don't think they hold as much value as the Martins. Martins hold value.
Right, okay. So I don't want to just talk throughout the entire video. I do want to show you some guitars and play them as well. So before I play them, can you just tell us a little bit about this instrument that I'm holding here?
Okay, so this is the Martin 0042 from 1920s.
1920s?
Yeah, I think 1921 is the exact year.
So this is an antique?
Antique slash vintage. Okay. It's over 100 years old. So as we spoke about earlier, the Martin guitars, the models with the 18 number are mahogany on the side and back. The 28 will be the rosewood side and back. 42s will be Brazilian rosewood side and back because of the age. But 42s had a lot of the extra bling on top. So you see the inlays here? There's inlays all around the edges, around the rosette and up here.
Oh, even around the fretboard neck here. Wow.
Yes, so there's more aesthetics in the 42, and like when you go up to the 45s, they'll have inlays here and all around the back as well.
But beyond just the aesthetic bling, it's also that they use higher quality wood in the higher range series, right? Okay.
Cool. So this is an Adirondack spruce top with the X-brace, and the back and side will be Brazilian rosewood.
All right, let's hear how it sounds. That's really warm and dry, and also it sounds, I don't know if I'm just imagining it, but it sounds really old. It sounds as if this guitar has lived for a very long time. And talking about that particular vintage sound, which I feel that I know what a vintage sound is, but I don't know how to describe it, and I don't know why vintage guitars or old guitars have this characteristic woody, dry sound.
I guess, I don't know, the best way I can explain it is maybe if you talk about aged wine or whiskey, you know, that they've got that really oaky, woody flavors to it when they're aged.
Yeah.
So similarly with guitars, when you pick up a new guitar compared to a vintage, you can hear that a new guitar is just bright and crisp and it just sounds so new.
Yeah.
But when you pick up a vintage guitar, especially one like this, and you hear this maturity in its tone, like it's woody, it's open, it's very resonant. Of course, tonally, the tonal quality depends on the type of wood used as well, but you can just hear the difference.
So I've already played this guitar. I noticed we have some other guitars here, and you mentioned Gibsons. So maybe we can talk about this instrument over here.
Sure.
So this is...
That's a Gibson Banner J45 from 1942. So it's using a thermally aged red spruce on the top. So red
thermally
spruce,
aged.
Yes.
What is that?
So so red spruce is one of the common woods that were used in the golden era. So that's one of the things that's notable in golden era guitars, red spruce. Thermally aged, I'm not sure about the exact process, but it's some kind of a heat treatment where they age the wood in some way.
Okay.
And then it's mahogany on the back and side. But what's amazing about this guitar is the story. So Gibson origins is from Kalamazoo, Michigan, right?
Yeah.
When the men went to war in the 1940s, women manned the factory for a while and built guitars.
Okay.
This is one of them.
Right, so this was built by women back in that day.
Yes. Which
is really unusual.
Yes. So you can say this has got a woman's touch.
Okay. And when you said that this is thermally aged, so did they age it right from the beginning when they were building it?
Yeah, so they used some kind of aging process on that piece of wood before actually constructing the guitar.
Okay. And also another term, you used the term golden era. When is this period?
So golden era is generally between 1920s to early 1940s, but some people may have differing opinions about this. Some guys may say it's 1934 to 1939 specifically, but the general consensus is it's in the era of 1920s to early 1940s.
Right, okay. And the guitars built in that period are considered one of the most valuable and prized.
Yes. So anything that's come out from late 1940s to 1950s, there's actually a big difference in price between those and golden era guitars.
Okay, cool. I'm going to try this out. I'm already noticing it has a really, really
chunky neck,
which feels very interesting. I kind of like it actually. Not something that I usually play, yeah, but it's really cool. Let's try something. Cool, thank you very much for letting me play this instrument. Built by women in the 1940s. Wow, okay. So this is quite the story behind it. And I think that's one thing that I really like about vintage guitars. Every instrument that has survived so many years until today has a story. It's gone through so much more than we have.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, this guitar has been around way longer than we have. Yeah. All right, so we have one more guitar here that we're going to try out. And this does not look like your typical acoustic guitar. What is this?
So this is a 1937 Martin Archtop guitar. So Martin tried to compete with Gibson when Gibson was doing very well with their Archtops. So Gibson was the go-to guitar when it came to Archtops. Martin tried to compete with them, but failed. They didn't really succeed. So there actually aren't many of these around.
Okay.
So they're actually quite rare because they weren't produced in the huge numbers.
Yeah, so when you look at this guitar, you wouldn't think that it's a Martin because of the Archtop and the F holes and all that. So this is like a rare animal of Martin.
Yeah. So everything here is original except that it actually is supposed to have a pick guard over here. You see a screw hole here and here. There's actually supposed to be one there, but it's been removed.
Okay, okay. So is this supposed to be a jazz guitar?
Designed to be, yes, because like I said, it was designed to compete with Gibson's jazz Archtop guitars.
Right, okay. So let me try play something jazzy on this. Let's see how it sounds. I'll stop there. I just had to do that little walking bass thing because it's really fun. So these guitars didn't really take off back then.
No, they didn't.
But I mean, it sounds great. There's nothing wrong with it, right? I mean,
there's nothing wrong. It just wasn't very well received by the target audience.
Right. So Martin decided to focus their energies on the flat tops instead. All right. So we've got 3 great examples here, and here at Heirlooms we've got so many more, right? We can't show every single instrument, but I think what's valuable, what we learned today, is that vintage instruments have a specific character, they have a specific sound, and the ones that have survived until today, they have done so and aged beautifully because of the very good construction methods and the materials used back then. So there's a reason why you can't really replicate that today.
Yes.
At least you have to wait another 100 years to get the new vintage instruments.
Well, I mean, even so, I don't think that's possible because these were constructed in the original factories, both Martin and Gibson. And in 1965, when they shifted to mass production, factory production, everything changed.
Right, okay.
So you can never get them like this ever again.
So you can't get, so even 100 years from now, you're not going to have new vintages.
Not like this.
Different, something different. Okay.
Yeah, that's why they've got such a high value and price tag. Yeah.
All right. So personally, I really love playing vintage guitars as well. I have a vintage guitar that I bought from Heirlooms Guitar, and it's Heirlooms Music. It's 1920. It's like 105 years old, and it's one of my favorite guitars today. Yeah.
And that guitar will probably appreciate in value now because Martin have increased their prices over time, and along with their prices going up, vintage prices also went up.
Oh, okay, but I have no intention of selling my vintage guitar. And at the rate that I'm playing it, it's okay, I look after my vintage guitar, but it's also something interesting that I bought that guitar to play. I didn't buy it as a collector. I'm not a guitar collector. I mean, I love my guitars, but I want to play them.
You're a player. So so for vintage guitars, like I said, there are mainly 2 categories. Utility, that's for the player like you, because you genuinely like the sound, feel the touch of the guitar. And then there's a collector who buys it because, not only because they like the guitar, but because they see the investment value in the guitar as well. So it's for them, it's also an investment in terms of monetary value.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Andre, for sharing with us about vintage guitars. And yeah, if you're in Singapore, please come down to Heirlooms Music. There's so many vintage guitars, and not just vintage guitars, boutique guitars, and also guitars for everybody, right? Not just these really high-end ones. So it's a really, really joyful place here, very warm and welcoming, and I encourage you to take a look.